what people say to me is the fact that what you've done through your life as far as playing and the commitment and passion to the music.
What if I told you that Jimmy Page, the guitar sorcerer of Led Zeppelin, spent decades holding silent grudges against some of rock's biggest icons? Names like Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, and more. For over 50 years, he kept quiet, but when he finally spoke, his words cut sharper than any guitar riff. And once you hear who he truly couldn't stand, you'll never look at rock history the same way again. Stay with me, because one of these feuds will absolutely shock you. Jimmy Page vs. Eric Clapton. To the world, Clapton was a prophet. Clapton is God, the fans wrote on walls, notebooks, and bathroom stalls. But to Jimmy Page, those 3 words were a joke. Page once muttered, "If that's God, I'd rather play with my head than with an empty heart like that." It wasn't jealousy, it was contempt. Page saw Clapton as a man with 3 blues licks in his pocket, writing them until the day he died. And the tension only deepened when Clapton quietly poached drummer Jim Gordon from Page's plans, without a word of warning. To Page, that wasn't just theft, it was betrayal. The feud simmered for decades. When organizers begged the two to perform together at the 1983 ARMS concert, Clapton agreed. Page? A cold, firm no. No explanation. No reconciliation. And when asked in 2010 what he thought of Clapton, Page simply sipped his tea and said, "Clapton is probably the best guitarist among those who never dared to take risks. Me? I don't play safe." But if Clapton was a target of Page's quiet wrath, the Rolling Stones' Keith Richards sparked a very different kind of fire. Jimmy Page vs. Keith Richards. 2 titans of British rock, you'd expect mutual respect. Instead, what we got was a half-century of icy tension. Richards mocked Led Zeppelin as flashy noise without soul. Page fired back, saying anyone could strum 3 chords and call it art. And then came the Madison Square Garden incident in 1975. Page politely extended his hand. Richards smirked and said, "I don't shake hands with a thief." The room froze. Page never forgot it. From then on, he dismissed the Stones as 3 chords, 1 riff, and an attitude. Richards countered with his own jab, "They can build rocket engines, but they forgot to write songs that make people cry." But Keith wasn't the only guitarist who clashed with Page's vision of rock. In the 80s, a new speed demon arrived, and Page despised everything he stood for. Jimmy Page vs. Yngwie Malmsteen. Yngwie Malmsteen stormed the scene with lightning-fast scales and classical flair. But to Page, speed without soul was meaningless. He once scoffed, "If you play 3,000 notes and none of them mean anything, what's the point?" Their tension exploded at a London charity event in 1991. Malmsteen walked into the green room, velvet suit and sunglasses indoors. Page muttered, "Great. Dracula plays a strat," without missing a beat. Yngwie smirked, "At least Dracula practices." The room went dead silent. If Page saw Malmsteen as a soulless technician, his feelings toward Jimi Hendrix were far more complicated. Jimmy Page vs. Jimi Hendrix. When Hendrix lit up London in 1967, the world gasped. But in a dark corner backstage, Page didn't clap, he glared. To Hendrix, music was chaos and fire. To Page, it was ritual and control. Hendrix smashed guitars. Page called it theatrics. Hendrix played like lightning. Page built sonic cathedrals brick by brick. And when Hendrix died in 1970, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Page? Silence. When finally asked about Hendrix's legacy, he simply said, "It was a unique moment in time." Praise or dismissal? Fans still debate it today. And then came the 70s and 80s, when a new revolution threatened to dethrone Page entirely, led by Eddie Van Halen. Jimmy Page vs. Eddie Van Halen. Van Halen's eruption wasn't just a solo, it was a cultural earthquake. But to Jimmy Page, it was parlor tricks. In a smoky London pub, after hearing Eddie's tape, Page exhaled, "Anyone can learn parlor tricks. Real guitar playing comes from the heart." At one studio session, when Eruption played through the monitors, Page crushed his cigarette and said flatly, "I've heard enough bedroom noodling for one lifetime." Yet Eddie never fought back. He called Page an inspiration, always respectful, never defensive. And maybe that humility stung even more. Eddie didn't have to fight, he simply surpassed. When Eddie died in 2020, Page posted a short, polite tribute, but insiders knew, behind closed doors, he had never forgiven what Van Halen represented, a generation of guitarists who no longer needed mystique, scars, or pain to be kings. But perhaps the coldest disdain was reserved for another British guitar hero, Ritchie Blackmore. Jimmy Page vs. Ritchie Blackmore, Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, two pillars of 70s rock. But behind the scenes, Page dismissed Blackmore as nothing more than Renaissance fair nonsense. When asked about Blackmore's theatrical solos, Page snapped, "I don't have time for costume parties." To him, Blackmore wasn't a musician, he was a court jester with a guitar. Blackmore, sly as ever, never bit back directly. Instead, he praised Page as a clever recording technician. Was it genuine, or a backhanded insult? Fans still wonder. And yet, for all the silence, the cold glances, and the subtle digs, one thing was certain: Jimmy Page never considered Ritchie Blackmore his equal. So there you have it, the 6 guitarists Jimmy Page quietly despised: Clapton, Richards, Malmsteen, Hendrix, Van Halen, and Blackmore. These weren't just rivalries. They were wars of philosophy: soul versus speed, ritual versus chaos, mystique versus spectacle. And the question is, who was right? Was Jimmy Page guarding the sacred heart of music? Or was he simply too harsh, unable to embrace change? Drop a comment below. Who do you think is the greatest guitarist of all time? And who, honestly, should have never picked up a guitar? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because next time, we're diving into another untold chapter of rock's raw, electrifying history.